too many phones, and so I'm like, I need to take them all out of my pocket all the time.
All these things are off.
Yeah, because I would be the one to.
Do I start? Oh, cool. Oh, it's on already. Hi, everybody. How are we doing? Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Happy draft week.
Indeed.
Yes.
Yeah, all your mics are on, so everyone else can say hi
Right.
too.
Happy Pride Night. For
Happy
the Cavs.
Pride Night.
Yes, Pride Night
Ah.
for Cavs.
In case you didn't know, there is a Pride Night at the Cavs game this evening. Go Cavs. Go Cavs. Welcome
guys.
to the Sports Policy plus LGBTQ athlete panel conversation. Thank you so much for being here this evening. We want to give a huge thank you to the Female Quotient, the Greater Cleveland Sports Commission, Velocity, the Cleveland Browns, etc., for having us for a super important conversation. My name is Ryan Clopton-Zimler. My pronouns are he and they. I am the co-founder and consultant of Sage and Maven, and also I work at Ohio University Heritage College of Osteopathic Medicine in the Office of Inclusion. I'm going to kick it over to Patty to my left.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. My name is Patty Hace. I am the current board chair for Stonewall Sports Cleveland, which is a community-based organization for LGBTQ plus and allies around sports here in Cleveland. I am also a teacher at Hawken School, and I am currently the head of a human performance department and health teacher, as well as a volleyball coach.
Yeah, and hi everybody. My name is Timothy Bussey. My pronouns are they, them. I am actually also in higher education. I am the associate director in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Kenyon College, which is down in Knox County, Ohio. And as a part of that, I am also one of the facilitators for the NCAA's Division III LGBTQ OneTeam program, which is the NCAA's first division-wide LGBTQ plus training initiative. And I have a couple other community hats that I also wear with like Ace and Arrow groups and also my local pride organization down in Newark, Ohio as well. And I will pass it over to Gio.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Gio Santiago. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm the Northeast Ohio Regional Organizer with Equality Ohio. I'm also the founder and CEO of Meta Center, Inc., which stands for Motivate, Educate, Transform, and Advocate. It is a nonprofit geared towards assisting transgender and gender nonconforming youth and young adults, ages 5 to 25, based in Akron, but all across the country and in Toronto. I'm also the new youth sports director for Studio West 117th, so the giant hub that is being built in Lakewood. I'll be running all of the LGBTQ youth sports there, so super excited about that. And Timothy and everyone else on the panel, I wear 1,000 other hats, but yeah, doing this fun thing is my favorite, so yeah, I'll kick it back to you.
Thank you. Give a round of applause for our speakers this evening. So, like I mentioned, our topic is sports policy and LGBTQ athlete equality. And just to give you a brief overview of what we're going to talk about, sports have the power to transform individuals and bring communities together. Until recently, however, being an openly LGBTQ athlete came with great personal and professional risk. But finally, the game is changing. We're here to talk to LGBTQ athletes and educators and advocates about paving the way, and we'll explore how inclusive sports policies can promote wider progress for the LGBTQ community. So, to kick us off, our first question, for a long time, queer and trans people have been left out of the conversation as it relates to sports. Why do you think that is? And if you're comfortable, just share a brief bit of your experience as an athlete or just being related to the world of sports. We'll go in the same order and start with Patty.
Great. I believe that the voice and the voices of the LGBTQ sort of community, I think, is a significant part of that, but more importantly around the trans community and having access in the sports community is really key. I know that from the Stonewall sports community aspect, That's been a huge focus about the inclusivity and bringing awareness to that, but more importantly, creating policies and components within our own infrastructure and emphasizing for us bringing pronoun patches and bringing some pronoun components to even our uniforms so that it brings awareness and allows for that safe space for those.
Thank you.
Yeah. So when we're talking about like, sort of, why do we think like LGBTQ plus folks sometimes have not had this sort of representation in athletic spaces? I think that's one of these questions that's like really, really easy to ask, right? But very difficult to answer. So I think that it all kind of boils down to like, we're talking about issues of like systemic oppression in our society. So we're talking about like, all of these things that create situations in our society where certain folks aren't valued or certain folks aren't able to participate authentically or openly. And, that's something we've definitely seen with sports. Right now we're seeing it a ton with particularly trans folks in sports, but it wasn't really even that long ago when we're talking about just like sexuality in general being potentially a career ender when we're talking about professional athletics in particular. So I think that, it's one of those things where it's very easy to ask the question, but there's so many different layers, and I don't think we have enough time on the panel to like dig into all of them, but I'll pass it to Gio for some other insights.
Yeah, I think an easy answer for that is also fear. You hear that a lot, especially when it comes to trans athletes, like the fear of if a trans woman is stronger or if a trans man is stronger, so that is the deepest root, I feel like, of a lot of that. And as a trans person myself and an athlete since I could probably walk, I started playing basketball when I was 5, I'm talking about die hard, used to sleep with the ball. And so for me, every sport I always played, in hearing the anti-LGBTQ stuff that you would hear even at 12 and 13, you're like, well, is it because I'm different? And what does that look like? And then once I got older and continued to play, even, in the military when I was playing, it was like, what is it because I feel that, I train harder because that's what is in my head, like I'm just lifting more weights, but somebody else saying, well, it's because you're on hormones or all of these unnecessary things. So just always knowing that there's something different within yourself, but then hearing those disparities. And I think because it was always so openly said, even when we're in high school, it's like, well, the girls on the softball team, they're all gay. And that's, that's the sentiment. And so it's driven into us when we're so young that I think it's just that. It's the fear and then just the non-normalization of it.
Yeah, a couple of things that kind of came up as you all were speaking. First and foremost, I think that question, these voices have always been there. They just haven't been attached to out queer and trans people. There have always been queer and trans people in sports. They just either weren't out or, eventually would come out and didn't understand the language yet. And so they've always been there. These perspectives have always been there. We've just had to figure out the safest ways to do it. Because that's ultimately, so much of what it's about. It's safety for what happens if someone comes out, not only to their career, but to their actual like physical well-being. And something that I thought was interesting, I was actually just talking about this with someone the other day. I never considered myself a person who liked sports. I literally hated team sports as a kid because I was so uncomfortable. I felt like I was getting made fun of all the time. And it wasn't until Stonewall Sports started and I got to play with other queer people and people who were not coming in from this perspective of you have to be one thing in order to be considered a successful athlete. Turns out I'm really good at sports. I had no idea. I just assumed that everyone was right about me. And then I found the right group of people and, the right sport and all these other things that it turns out when we give people a chance to just be themselves and to live into who they are, they succeed at things because they're not worried about the pressures, the things that are just explicitly and implicitly out there. And that kind of pivots to the next question that I have. Pretty much all of you have touched on a really pertinent issue right now, specifically related to anti-trans legislation, specifically related to trans youth and trans youth in sports, a huge reason that I think we're even having this conversation. So what message do you think those types of policies, like anti-trans legislation, even though it seems just to be quote unquote about sports, what message does that send, and how can we sort of provide support that counters that message? It's a two-part question. I'm gonna start with Gio, because you own Meta Center.
It's sending the message that it's okay. It's okay to be disgusting and terrible and degrading. And for me, it's like, these are kids. You know, as an adult, it's like, you can say whatever you want. I'm not really fazed, and I think that's also me as a person. But to just say those things to kids, for me, just doesn't resonate well. And so as someone who also was a youth sports coach and is now currently gonna be a youth sports coach again, I know how speaking life into a child when you're coaching them in a sport is so important. And not only that, but as a LGBTQ child playing this sport, you know, like you said, you already feel awkward, you know, yourself. And so if you're feeling awkward in the sport, that's a problem. And so you're already trying to play these things sometimes to build confidence, especially in like junior high. And so if you're seeing the news or you're hearing it and they're like, no, you're not allowed to play because you're different, it's just like you're already feeling different, and now you're also being told that you're different. And so that's what I feel like. It's just sending a message of, just that it's okay to be disgusting. Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of to echo Gio's point, I think these bills say a lot to trans and non-binary youth. And, you know, one thing that I sort of think that they're saying in a not so implicit way is, you're not welcome here. You are not welcome in this particular environment. And when we're talking about sports that are also tied to school-based settings, that's also saying you're not welcome at this school. And so when we're talking about like what this legislation does and the impact that it has on our trans and non-binary youth, like it can't be underscored enough. Like it is having a drastically dangerous impact. Like what these lawmakers are doing is deadly, and it needs to be treated as such, because we know that when trans youth are in educational environments where they aren't supported and the school climate is hostile, like we have 25, 30-something years of data from organizations like GLSEN that tell us what that does. We know that we have higher risks of mental health concerns like suicide, suicidal ideation, depression, anxiety. We also know that we have lower academic performance, so lower GPAs, more school absences, less educational aspirations, so that feeling of like continuing your education. And we also have lots of data about not just trans and LGBTQ plus people in sport, but just about sports in general, and how connection to sport fosters not just well-being physically and mentally when participating, but how it actually contributes to lifelong physical and mental well-being. And so what these bills are saying is that trans kids aren't welcome on the team, and by this being about teams in school-based settings, you're not welcome at school. And that says a lot, and it's really, really dangerous.
Yeah.
Super powerful, Tim, and I appreciate that, because I think the idea behind sports for us, that's actually in and of itself supposed to be a community, and an affirming community. I think many of us can, an identifier as being an athlete. I think oftentimes being an athlete is part of who you are. So when you're also part of the LGBTQ community as another identifier, they shouldn't be mutually exclusive. They should, in fact, enhance and support that aspect. And many of us can talk about teams or coaches or people in our youth that were vital in that shaping of the identity in many ways. So to create policy that actually prevents individuals from finding those spaces is dangerous, and those spaces are meant to be supportive for that mental health in many different ways. So the policies, you know, as you're talking about trying to speak on behalf of all the little girls out there, as the quote has been used, it's actually you're choosing the little girls' voices over our trans youth, and that's not appropriate or right either.
Yeah, and I think it excludes trans girls. Like, you're not speaking for all girls, you're speaking for cisgender girls or heterosexual girls who are being conditioned to think that their trans sisters and their queer sisters are either inherently predatory or they are somehow different than you in a negative way, right? Like, they're gonna be too strong, or they're gonna, you know, overpower you in some way. A lot of it feeds into that fear. And something that I was thinking of, it starts so early, right? And so much of transphobia and fear of gender diversity is rooted in sexism. So what were we told? Well, for myself, as a feminine little kid, being told that I throw like a girl. I don't remember anyone saying that I was specifically bad at something. I just remember them saying, like, I have this memory of being in the library in like second grade, and we could see the kids outside, and for some reason, someone decided to tell me that I throw like a girl. And it's seared in my head. And what that says is you throw badly, which equates girlness with badness. And so similarly, this legislation, by saying trans kids are dangerous or predatory or whatever, it also equates that with just deviance, that there's something wrong with these people, again, in a negative, predatory way.
And I would also say really quickly, too, that these laws make, and I guess I should say these bills, because here in Ohio it is not law yet, thankfully. But it definitely is rooted in this notion of sexism. And the other thing that I think is really important, too, is the policies that are trans inclusive. So like the policies at the for the International Olympic Committee, for the NCAA, for Ohio high school sport associations here in our state, and so many other places across the country. Those are policies that are informed by science. Like, we have research, medical evidence, and scientific data that shows trans girls don't have any inherent advantage over cisgender girls. And in fact, by trying to push trans girls onto men's teams or exclude them from sport completely, that's just causing harm to trans girls and trans youth. And so, ultimately, it just feels like it comes down to, like, this is a group of lawmakers who want to bully trans kids. And that's what it boils down to.
Yeah. There's something, especially nefarious about that idea that, like, adults are sitting around thinking about ways to punish kids. Like, they're not your kids, don't worry about them. But then if we want to think about it from, an intersectional lens, of course, this affects all women. So, there were Black women who were athletes who were believed to be too fast or too strong, and so what's the first thing that they do is they start hormone testing them to imply that they cannot be cisgender women. And it doesn't go unnoticed that it's only happening to Black women. And of course, it just falls into this racist notion that somehow Black people are inherently better at sports, which sounds like a good stereotype, but there's no such thing as a good stereotype, because then it just lumps us all together. And when you don't fall into that, lump, you're weird, you're bad, there's something wrong with you. So the question that I have, especially considering how each of you sort of work in different realms of sports, community sports, high school, higher education, what does it look like to support queer, trans, gender diverse kids in your settings?
I can jump in. I think just even the fact that more and more data is coming out about Gen Z and how so many of them identify in the LGBTQ family and queer, I think speaks volumes about how that information and that targeting is actually at youth. And in our community, I think at Hawken last week, students put on what they called Rainbow Week and brought pronoun pins and tried to teach the community about pronouns. And it was targeted not just for helping the youth, but for them to also have the adults who are not used to using pronouns to teach them in a safe sort of way. And I think those types of steps will make a difference because it's an empathetic component to the students, and therefore will translate into many of those spaces as coaches to hear and be able to use their pronouns out on the court or in the field or in the pool. So I think that having actual appropriate hearing from them and hearing what they need and hearing what that aspect looks like for them is key.
Also, weren't some of your kids like helping get people signed up for vaccines?
They were, yes.
First of all, so precious. Second of all, it just really warms your heart to think like that activism in children is still alive and well and is completely different than what we would expect. You know, there's this gigantic portrayal of Gen Zers being just like obsessed with their phones, and I mean, I think that's also millennials too. It is also true. It is very true. TikTok is like a worrisome place, but it's also incredibly powerful. And you know, organize through these things. They create strategies and solutions for things, and we don't give them enough credit that they understand what is happening in the world. So we don't get to pretend like these, pieces of legislation aren't translating to them. They fully understand what this stuff means.
And oftentimes, I mean, it's hard enough for them to have those conversations, especially in those spaces or those communities or with adults, and they do it out of frustration, and they do it because they have these needs, that they challenge and make us better. I say us because I'm one of those faculty members that need to do the same type of thing. So we always have to be able to grow, but they shouldn't have to always fight for that. There should already be a space. You talk about sports, that's that space. That should be a safe space for them to be able to have those conversations and push for that. But I think in the same way, Stonewall Sports, having organizations, I talk about youth, but also as adults, because we talk about not everyone comes out as youth. It takes some time, and that's so vital to be able to have at checkpoints along the way. Stonewall Sports Cleveland was a space for myself and many others of being able to come out and to be able to own that identity in their own safe process and safe sort of way. And we have adults of all ages, 21 and up, in many different sports, and sports just happens to be the medium in which we come together in that process. So
Yes.
Yeah. So in terms of, and we're talking about in terms of this, how to support. Sorry,
Yeah, I
just wanna
realized
make sure I get the
we
question
shifted a
right.
little bit.
My bad.
Yeah.
Oh no, you're fine. It was great. I
Supporting
just-
students in higher education.
Okay, cool. So in terms of like supporting particularly like LGBTQ student athletes, I mean, we're obviously talking about like classroom inclusion, but when we're talking about athletics in particular, we're really talking about making sure that coaches and athletic administrators understand how to support their students. And so, that's a very broad sort of thing. So whether it's supporting a student that's coming out, so recognizing that you might have students that join a team that aren't out and come out on the team. So making sure it's a safe space for them to do that, but that they also have support from their teammates as well. But it also looks like a variety of other things. I mean, we still live in a society where some folks find themselves dealing with housing insecurity by virtue of coming out. So like, there may be coaches that like they might be the first person that a student athlete shares that experience with and is sort of looking to them as a resource. So there's also sort of these practical elements of just supporting them as an LGBTQ plus person and young adult. And kind of, with the stuff that I do with the NCAA's LGBTQ OneTeam program, we, in a non-global pandemic, which I'm also just so happy to be like at a live event. I meant to say that earlier. It's weird to like see people.
Like I can't touch you, but I can touch you. Like
Right.
You're close
right,
enough.
yeah.
You're close enough.
So, in a normal sort of setting, I would be traveling to different college campuses and training various coaches on how they can support LGBTQ plus students. But, sometimes like support in higher ed also looks a little different. Like sometimes it's just looking at like physical facilities and figuring out what works. Like one thing we did at Kenyon College was sort of realizing that our athletic center didn't have the sort of spaces at the time, didn't have the sort of spaces to meet the demand of our growing non-binary population. And so figuring out like how those spaces can better utilize gender-neutral locker rooms and facilities so everyone can come to the athletic center and have a space, even if it's something as simple as just getting ready for a workout. So I think sometimes it can vary like very wildly.
And I think that's what it kind of all boils down to is that ability to find your people, whether it's a single individual that you feel comfortable coming out to, whether it is a team, whether it is, a extracurricular organization. That's where people find safe haven, especially when they don't have that safe haven at home. I'm sorry, Gio, go ahead.
No, you're fine. That's a great point. And for me as a coach, in working on the programming for the new LGBTQ youth sports program, basketball was the first sport that I thought of. And not because it's my favorite sport, but because I feel like it's the most universal. Like anyone can play basketball, and it's not like, it's normally based on like height or speed and not gender. And so, you often see a lot of like pickup games that are co-ed in basketball. And I feel like you don't see that a lot in other sports. Soccer might be the next one you might see it in the most. But so for me, I feel like it's a great place to start for the youth. Like everyone can play together at that age and learning, because you're learning skills. And so also, I work at Nike, so I deal with all the kids that come through there. They're trying to get their clothes, they're trying to get their shoes. And so I always make it a point of, whenever I hear a parent or a guardian or whoever the child is with speaking ill about something, even if it's just about like the athletic apparel that they want to wear, I'm like, who cares? It's clothes. If he wants that pink shirt, pink is a color. Like, it's not that deep. So I think it's so much deeper than the physical sport that people are playing. But also, to Patty's point, like talking about the checkpoints in life, what was that, 2 years ago when we were all out in the world, they had the MLB All-Star Game here. So they had that fabulous, interactive experience. And I was down there working for Nike, and I saw Jenny Finch walk past. And if you don't know who Jenny Finch is, that means A, you're not old enough, and B, you don't know sports ball. Jenny Finch was an amazing pitcher for the U.S. women's softball team. And so we're taking it back to the sports pay gap and all of that. Women's sports have always been better in the U.S. than men's anyway. Let's tell the truth there. The men's teams are terrible. Like, why are they even still allowed to play bad? I don't even know if the men's team has won 10 games in 3 years or something, So Jenny Finch walks past, and I was like, oh, shit, that's Jenny Finch. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that word, but I was like, oh, man. So I was there, with one of my coworkers, one who does know that I'm trans, and I was like, I just want to go say what's up. But then in my head, I'm like, I am a guy, and women's athletes always have to be conscious when men approach them. And so I'm like, okay, it's a lot going on over there with Jenny Finch. Let me just keep it cool. About 10 minutes later, Lisa Fernandez walks past, and I was like, damn, that's Lisa Fernandez. So I'm like, in all of my 14-year-old girl softball player glory, because I'm like, I am seeing all of my idols. And so for me at 33 at that time, I'm like, all of these things have stayed with me, from being I was 12 or 13, I'm going to be a U.S. women's softball player. And so I did go up to Lisa Fernandez, and I just told her, I was like, I just want to tell you, I'm trans. I grew up watching you play. You made such an impact on my life just by watching you play the game that you love to play. And she was super receptive. I'm talking about gave me a hug, chatted it up with me. And so those are the things that are important. What we learn when we're playing sports, what we learn when we're watching, and the conversations that we're having, and the memories that you build that go with you. And so that's what I want to do for children as I'm coaching them, as I am cheering them on. Whatever it is that I'm doing, I want to always make sure that they understand that play the game that you love just because you love it, and it doesn't matter what anyone else has to say about it.
Yeah, I think, what happens when you get involved in sports, when you're not able to do it. I don't have great memories of being forced to play sports. Absolutely was the kid in the outfield just spinning around and kicking dust. I hated being there. It was so boring. Everyone was mad all the time. I didn't get it. And now, as an adult, I found my way into this, queer and trans sports league, and literally the people who are here to support me are all people that I met through that league, because that's my family. That's what happens when you allow people to come together in a truly authentic way. And what we are, I don't think any of us think about this, but by being out athletes, I do not consider myself an athlete, but by sitting up here and presenting myself as
to cut
athlete,
in, Nike says if you have a body, you're an athlete.
Okay,
that's
work.
their new slogan. I'm just telling you, so you're an athlete.
I am technically one of the longest reigning champions for Stonewall Sports Cleveland kickball. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to my fellow champions over there. That is Kegels in the outfield. That's our sports team. Great people. Anyways, so what we don't think about a lot is that we're setting, the tone. We are creating an environment in Northeast Ohio and, elsewhere that there is something for you to look forward to. You will find your people. I think if most of us could go back in time to our younger selves, I would hold myself by the shoulder and say, you're gonna be great. You're gonna find your people, and guess what? It's gonna be playing sports. And I would not believe it. And so, sort of trying to pivot this into the happy parts about all of this, not just the community, but what's happening sort of naturally. It's very hard to like think about the last few years and think positively. But you know, there have been a lot of strides, especially in terms of visibility. So if you all want to like reflect on some of the wins that come to your mind as it relates to queer people, trans people, non-binary people in general, but especially if you can think about, you know, sports and what that's been like. My first thing is like Michael Sam, but that's, you know, I feel like it was quite a ways back.
Let's talk about Sue Bird and Megan Rapinoe. Like,
Oh,
first off,
word.
the Bird, man.
Yeah.
Like, but that right there just showed, you know,
Icons.
and a class act with it, though. Like, I'm just gonna be me authentically, and you're just gonna have to deal with it. And that is like Megan Rapinoe to a T, I feel like. And so just looking at those two individuals and just saying, you know, okay, I'm going to be able to just use my voice in whatever way possible, leveraging their platform. But, you know, not only that, but like intersectionality with it, you know, like they're like, and Black Lives Matter too. Oh, you don't like me because I'm a lesbian? Also, you're not gonna like me because I'm gonna say Black Lives Matter. So just really thinking about all of that and what came out of even the women standing up who are athletes. You know, you think about other athletes like Serena, even though she's not, you know, queer identified, she sets the standard for living authentically and not taking any shit. And I think that is a standard that we as, you know, queer and trans people are having to live by when we're, you know, playing sports and in athletics. And so just, you know, thinking about those individuals, it's like, okay, but then you think about people now like Larry Nance Jr. who are like, hey man, non-discrim sucks, man. You gotta get on board with being like, don't discriminate. And so he's a popular, you don't know who he is.
I don't. I'm so sorry. I got nothing for you.
I got you.
He plays for the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes. No. Number 22. Just
Go
you know, a little
Cavs.
sport. Go Cavs. But, you know, so it's not even just at this point the athletes that are queer identified that are standing up for their fellow athletes. And so that's important because it also shows that they are people and they are watching the news and they're hearing what is happening. So,
Serena's tutu actually said gay rights.
like, boom.
When she showed up in that tutu, that was a moment for me. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
See? And that's what I'm saying. It resonated with you in a different way. It didn't even have to resonate with you about her being a tennis player,
Right.
but she wore something that piqued your interest, and it was all about the message.
Yes, absolutely.
So I'm gonna totally kind of piggyback off of Gio's answer because I think that, yeah, like hearing what particularly non-LGBTQ plus people are doing in sport to advocate for the rights of queer and trans folks, I think is important. One kind of moment of uplift that I had, and like it's been hard with obviously all of the anti-trans legislation and like so much of it being aimed at our youth and young people. One kind of uplifting moment that I had was, you know, just like the everyday activism that is happening of people who aren't trans speaking out and sharing like why they don't want this legislation to happen and just speaking out and fighting for our trans youth. And like, just because I'm such a numbers minded person, one like really impressive and like particularly important thing I think that was a good moment of uplift for me was, I think it was like maybe two and a half weeks ago, but PBS NewsHour did a national poll that asked the question of, should trans people be able to play on sports teams that align with their gender identity? And it was something like 80%. 80% said, yeah, they should. And it wasn't even this thing of like a Republican or a Democratic leaning thing. 80% and basically despite partisanship and party ID. And like the general public wants trans kids to be able to play on the team that corresponds to the gender with which they identify. And I think that is like an important message to understand that like the general public nationally supports trans youth. Mm-hmm. Like we're watching what our legislators are doing and we'll hold them accountable. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's just, for me at least, was a good moment of uplift.
I think that to continue with that, I think it emphasizes though the importance of the allyship of that public and stepping up and speaking out instead of just sharing the opinion in those polls is to really like make a statement. That visibility is equal on both sides. I think that the visibility for our kids and the visibility for those who are just unaware of the policies in place, but that allyship is so important.
Yes, and there was something that Timothy was saying that's already escaped my mind because I'm being conscious of the time. So we have about 10 minutes left. I want to ask one more question, and then I'm going to ask you all to sort of think about a parting message for folks to take with them. So the final question is, what needs to happen? What are, in terms of both legislation as well as just sort of cultural shifting, what needs to happen in order for us to see, actual equality in sports?
I don't think that's ever going to happen. I mean, just let's be, very honest. Actual equality is never going to happen. And
We still haven't even fixed the pay gap. So
man, okay,
off to a great
like the men's teams are terrible. I'm going to say it again. Like, pay these women and female identified folks more money. Like, just let's say that first.
one lone woo. From it.
But yeah, thanks, my one fan. No, but I feel like it's very similar to being a black or a brown person. Like, even once you reach the end, the bar shifts. And I feel like that's what's going to happen once we get whatever this full equality is, for these young athletes and adults. The bar is going to be shifted. Okay, well, now you have to be 5'9" to play basketball. And, just something stupid
Separate
like
but
that.
equal. It's going to remain separate
Exactly.
but equal, unfortunately.
And so that's kind of where things happen in my mind. But I feel like we have to keep fighting. We have to keep attempting to hold people accountable, as Timothy said, because if we're not, they're going to think it's okay. They're going to continue to think it's okay. And we know oftentimes we cannot change their minds, but we can change how they sign that paper when we're applying pressure. So they might go home and still feel how they feel, but they are more likely going to enact a law or, dismiss or, throw out a bill if people are applying that pressure. And I think that's what we have to keep doing. And education. Education is key. Keep educating, the public and our community on what this looks like.
So accountability. Who's next?
Yeah, I think education is another big one. I mean, I already mentioned earlier that a lot of this legislation is based in myth and fear and misinformation and just absolutely not scientific fact. And I think that the average person isn't, necessarily aware of that. I don't think the average person knows, well, how does hormone replacement therapy and how do the current rules at the NCAA and the IOC, how do they ensure fairness and equity in sport? Because they do. And they do, and we know that because science is a real thing. But I think that education component is really important. And ultimately, not to be kind of cynical, but I think Gio is right. I think we're still going to see these challenges emerging because even the challenge to trans inclusion in sport, these policies, the NCAA policy, the IOC policy, they're not new. It's not like they just came out with that this year. They've been around, I think, the NCAAs for over a decade at this point. And so it's very much like being chosen as this cultural moment of okay, this is the opportunity. And the opportunity is that people are afraid of trans folks. And so let's use that. And unfortunately, now we're trying to fight to keep the rights that were already in place. And so, I do think Gio's right in that of we're going to have to consistently be doing that. And that bar is going to continuously move, as unfortunate as that is.
Yes, education, and especially education about what is already in place. The anti-trans public accommodation stuff that was happening a few years ago and continues to happen. People like to gloss over the fact that there's already laws that protect people in bathrooms so that no one's going to harm you. There's already stuff to keep you safe. So this nonsense about keeping certain people out of the bathroom, you don't need to worry about who's in the bathroom because no matter who walks in there, you should be safe from any type of harm because that's how the law works. Right. Patty.
I think from my perspective, and that it's education, which is cliche at this point, but I think that awareness factor is so vital, especially as things evolve and change. I even think as an educator, how much more I have to learn along the way. We all have to continue to do that. So it's not oh, we check this off and we're done. So it's the consistency. It's the not just one part of a faculty meeting or one session in a conference. It's, it's an intentional approach to this type of language, to this type of policy writing, to this intentional approach to facilities, et cetera, that has to be built into the infrastructure.
So what is something that you would want everyone who was here this evening to walk away thinking about, even if they missed the entire first 50 minutes? What do you hope that people walk away remembering?
Sports builds character by way of commitment, development, and connections. And let trans youth and adults play sports and be themselves. Let people live, period.
Yes.
I think for me, if anyone is like just tuning in or you want a sort of takeaway message, it would be, consider what you can do for trans youth. There's a lot going on right now nationally, and take a moment to think of, who's my legislator? Who are the people that are representing me? And how can I communicate my support for trans youth? Because what is happening right now is dangerous, and we know that. We know that. And, we have to do what we can to protect our youth.
I believe that sports are meant to be a medium in which we connect and create community. And sports are meant to support and create safe space for everyone involved, especially for those who are shaping and developing their own identity. And more importantly, they're supposed to be fun, and they're supposed to be a safe space entirely. And they should continue to do that and not create policy that excludes in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and I think mine would be it's great to be different. It's very important that we recognize each other's differences. What we are asking for is not that everyone just ignores the fact that I am queer or that I am black or that someone has, a different gender or religion. No, those things are very important because they shape us into the individual people that we are. But at the end of the day, we are all just people, and we all just want to be able to play sports, turns out. Literally would never think that those words would come out of my mouth. But I'm super happy to be able to say them, that we're all just trying to do the same thing, and that's figure out, what's happening on this crazy space rock and just be happy while we do it. So I want to give a huge thank you to Patty Hace, Timothy Bussey, Gio Santiago. Give them all a round of applause for being here. Also, thank you to KeyBank and the First Energy Foundation, and to the Cleveland Browns, the Greater Cleveland Sports Commission, Velocity, and the Female Quotient. Happy draft weekend, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Hope to see you around. Enjoy Cleveland if you've never been here, and get a nice coat because this is the best you're going to get.
Yeah.
Thanks, y'all.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.